Hi, Brandon. I'm waiting for everyone to come in. We are talking about rebuttal today. I'm going to refresh some of the things that we talked about before break just to try to make sure that everyone's mindset is in the same place. Also, your job today is not to let me say the word so. So, if you hear me say the word so, you have to call me out in the comments. My aim for the next couple weeks is to entirely eliminate so as my dominant verbal filler. I will give everyone one more minute. Yes, I did that for effect, Brandon. I'll give everyone one more minute, and then I will start talking a little bit about rebuttal. Having read all of your first assignments, I have a better sense of where you're coming at and where you're still kind of stuck, and I'd like to address that today. There's a lot of people joining this live. I don't know. Hi, everyone. So if you've just... I did it. If you've just joined the live, number one, I'm not allowed to say so, and number two, we are talking about productive disagreement. What does productive disagreement looks like? How do you go about doing it? What are some of the temptations that people have when they have debates or arguments or disagreements in the political field as well as in the interpersonal sense? And then some strategies for doing something differently. That is our plan for today. Let me type a little title and then we'll start. Productive disagree. I can't spell. And then this shouldn't take more than about 15 minutes, I guess. And then I'm going to stop the video and download it. And then I'll come back for Q&A with students or really anybody else who wants to Q&A. I don't know. People be home. They be bored. Maybe they want to talk about some disagreement. Maybe you and your spouse are starting to get on each other's nerves and you need to bring up a few issues in the home. I know I'm feeling that way right now. All right. It's 1:02. Let's get started. Here's the deal with disagreement. You can use whatever word you want to talk about it. You can call it debate. You can call it argument. You can call it disagreement. You can call it a tiff. Those have different connotations. Typically, argument is something that's a little bit more heated, a little bit more formal, and people tend to have a negative connotation when you say something is an argument. I use the word argument to simply describe a structure of disagreement. So a type of format that you might use to engage someone else who doesn't agree with you. But I understand that when you say we are in an argument or I'm going to teach you how to argue, that can have negative connotations for people. Then you can call it a debate. Debate is much more formal, much more structured. The idea for a debate is that there's some kind of outcome typically, and we typically think of these as things that like presidents do, even though obviously you can have a debate with literally everyone. I use the word disagreement because I think of all the words, it's the most neutral. It also gives that sense of what I call productive disagreement. When I teach you to disagree with someone and the structure of argument and how to create claims and evidence, I'm really teaching it not so you can prove that you're right. This is really important. I teach you because what I want you to do is engage in disagreement with other people to come up with a better solution. So there are lots of reasons to engage in debate and an argument. There's a lot of, we call them polemics. So when you just kind of get on a soapbox and tell everyone why you're right and they're wrong, we call those polemics. And all of those have a place in your rhetorical performance. Did I say it, Becca? Dang it. All of those have a place in your performance. If you want to do that, then great. There are lots of forums in which it's totally appropriate and productive to stand on a soapbox and just rant and rave about how much you hate X or how much X bothers you or how X is totally wrong. And you'll notice that you're in that mode because you use words like truly, absolutely, totally, completely. They're completely wrong. This is totally not factual. So a lot of very hyperbolic, certain adjectives. You can even go back and look at a draft of your mini speech that you submitted and look for those kinds of adjectives. And I guarantee if you're using those kinds of words, they're completely wrong. This is totally false. This has no basis in reality. There's no fact here. If you do that kind of stuff, you're probably in the realm of what I call a polemic. I don't want you in that realm for this assignment. I want you in the realm of productive disagreement. What does that look like? Here's what it looks like. What if the person or the belief system or the organization or whoever your opponent is, if you were going to believe them, if you were going to take their side, what would be a really good reason to do that? I'll give you two examples and then I'm going to have you type some examples in the comments. If I were going to side with Trump supporters and argue that Trump should be the next president of the United States in 2020, The best reason that I could come up with is that Biden is not great presidential material. So if I were going to give them something, I would give them that. If I were going to side with pro-lifers about abortion and pregnancy termination, the reason that I would give them is that we do live in a society where we really value unborn life. It's just kind of ingrained in us to like protect the unborn life. Those are the two reasons I would come up with. And so then I begin my disagreement there. It's really easy to start disagreeing on things where you know you can win. That doesn't get you anywhere though. The only people who are persuaded when you argue about points you can already win are people who already agree with you. If the only people you're arguing with are people who already agree with you, you're not really in a disagreement. You are what we have, you're seeking confirmation bias. You just want to feel good that you're right. So I call this self-justified righteousness. And again, sometimes that feels good. So for example, if you and your spouse or your partner or your best friend, your roommate are in a disagreement and you want to rip them to shreds and tell your best friend or your roommate or whatever, your other roommate, how smart you are and how stupid this person is, that might feel really good. I'm not denying that that's a human pleasure. It doesn't get you anywhere though. It doesn't solve anything. It is not productive in the sense it does not produce any outcome except basically just you feeling righteous. So take a minute and write in the comments if I were going to believe whatever it is you currently don't believe. So if I were going to support animal therapy animals, whatever those are called. If I were going to support emotional support animals. If I were going to agree that Americans don't need to be bilingual. Whatever the opposite is of what you're currently arguing. If I were going to agree, I don't remember what the net neutrality argument was. If I were going to agree with pro-choice, because some of you wrote speeches about being pro-life, what would be the best reason that I have seen for their side that I could debate? Okay? So go ahead and write it in there. If I were going to agree with, thanks Becca, if I were going to agree with my opposite belief system, here would be my best convincing reason. If you can't think of one, you need to go do more research. Because here's the other thing about productive, and you can, while I'm talking, you can write these in the comments. Here's the other thing about productive disagreement. We often only know the arguments coming from the opposition because of what we're being told by people who already agree with us. So, for example, very often I will hop on a YouTube video and watch a clip of a Trump rally or a clip of a Trump press conference because I study Trump for my research. I'm very often surprised by how much stuff in there doesn't look like what I think everyone says it would look like. Now that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that they're only partially right. There's that, what's that saying? There's my side of the story, your side of the story, and then what actually happened. So, right, so everyone has a partial perspective. If you have not been immersing yourself in the perspectives of the opponent, you're really doing your argument a disservice, and you're also cherry picking what you want to argue to be right. And I'm not going to reward that behavior. So, Therefore, if you need to do more research, you can. But in the meantime, let's see what kind of stuff you've come up with. So I'm getting a lot of waves. I'm getting a lot of so's. I'm not getting any comments. Give me some comments. If I were going to agree with the opposition, what would be my best argument? Okay. If I were to support overfishing, first of all, you got to be careful of the word overfishing because you're already defining the opposition. And they probably wouldn't call it overfishing, right? You got to figure out what it is they would call it. In any format, I would say that a decent amount of people that overfish do it to make a living. Okay, great. So that's where your argument needs to happen. You need to be very focused on how do I help convince these people that the making a living argument is not either the best way to think about it or there's an alternate way to think about it. And also, how do some of my arguments, how are they insensitive or how do they not consider the fact that people make a living off of it? Notice how by thinking from their perspective, you not only get a better sense of what kinds of arguments they're going to be most persuaded by, but also maybe you haven't been very responsive to the fact people make a living on fishing. even though that fishing might be environmentally destructive, which I think is what you're calling overfishing, to them it is a livelihood. And you can't just say, I'm going to take that away from them. That's a thing people clutch onto. So how are you going to address that is what your argument for your rebuttal speech really needs to focus on. That was really great. Thank you. I don't know who that was, Triggs, but thanks. Victoria, if I were to agree with the certification of emotional support animals, it would be because the validity of emotional support animals promote mental health. Great. And Victoria, that's something you can say. We call this a qualifier. I'm not against people finding emotional comfort in their animals. But what defeats that on your mind? What is the bigger value that we need to be thinking about here? And you have to be really respectful of that. You can't just kind of dismiss it. But those are really good. Those are two really, oh, hey, Tom. Okay, awesome. Those are two really great examples. But that's gonna need to be a really important starting place for your rebuttal speeches. A lot of you, so far, what I'm seeing is, they're wrong, I'm right, here's all the reasons I'm right, whatever they said is stupid. That's not productive disagreement. That is soapbox, polemical, bitching and moaning, being righteous kinds of stuff. And I'm not mad at you about it. I am a deeply self-righteous person, but one of the things I've learned is that you really have a choice. You can solve a problem, or you can be right. And in this context, I'm really looking for you to find better ways to think about your... Victoria, I'm not sure on the question. I'm really trying for you to find better ways to disagree than I am for you to be right. Again, in some contexts, it is good to be righteous, and it is good to have sort of a zero tolerance policy. In other contexts where you have the chance, the only thing is that that's not going to persuade someone who doesn't already agree with you. So you have to think about what's your goal here. Is your goal to be righteous, or is your goal to persuade someone? And if the goal is to persuade someone, you have to practice productive disagreement. And that starts from thinking about, if my opponent were right, how would I go about this? And everything else flows from there. That's how you think about your stasis slip that we already discussed. That's how you think about turning the tables. That's how you think about your warm-up. When you're writing the speech, you really need to be writing for someone. So this is who I want you to write for and speak for. Someone who maybe is open-minded that they might be wrong. Maybe they're on the fence about it. Maybe they're undecided, but they sort of like the opposition. I don't want you to write to like direct hostiles. I'm not going to write to a devout Trump supporter why Trump shouldn't be reelected president. I'm also not going to tell a devout Biden supporter why Biden isn't a great Democratic candidate, because both of those people have their minds made up. I think about sort of what we call the undecided middle. And these are people who maybe they're leaning in your direction, or maybe they're leaning in the opposite direction, but they're relatively uninformed, they're relatively open-minded. And this does shockingly comprise a large amount of people. Many people have formed strong opinions about things with very little investment. You have an opportunity to show them that they've invested for reasons that maybe are working against their self-interest. But if you come at them like you're a dumb idiot and you shouldn't be on this side, they're going to defend. And if anything, you've pushed them further away into the opposite camp. So these are really important issues to think about. Let me read some comments, and then I have one more thing to say, and then I'm going to download. If I were against physician-assisted suicide, I would say it goes against the ethics of a physician, because physicians are supposed to heal patients. Great. And I think most people who are against the suicide, I think most people who are anti-physician-assisted suicide are going to tell you we're against it because that allows doctors to murder people. Doctors are supposed to heal and help people. You have to really work hard to convince them that actually caretaking can be in the form of physician-assisted suicide. And I believe you want to look into states like Oregon, which have made that legal. They do not call it physician-assisted suicide. They call it death with dignity. And that might be something you want to think about, because I think even so this is where we get into the stasis of definition. Even the stasis of definition you're using is probably not the one that is in your best interest. So you're working against yourself just by using language that someone else has provided for you. Tessa, so we just work this in throughout the whole speech. Yeah, Tessa, this is entirely an attitude shift. This is an attitude shift so that you start writing the speech from the sense of, I want to really look at the good reasons why people don't agree with me, and I really want to work hard on undermining and critiquing those good reasons with sort of a reasonable, sympathetic attitude, as opposed to this is crap, you're wrong, this is totally ridiculous, which is a lot of the stuff now some of you are already doing that. Holly is already working at this sort of issue of care and ethics. Some people haven't adopted the polemical tone, but for the large majority, polemic seems to be the thing you all want to do. And I get why, it feels good, but it's not what I'm asking you to do. It's not the assignment. You don't need to go to college to learn how to get on the internet and bitch and moan about how you're right and everyone else is wrong. Facebook will teach you how to do that if you just read some posts. So I don't see the reason to get a degree in that particular skill set. I'm trying to teach you the skill set other people don't have, which is if I really need to persuade somebody and they are not already on my side, but there may be some wiggle room or they're open-minded or I can see that they have some sympathies, how do I get them over to where I am? If I were to agree with the FDA that pumps probiotic drugs, okay. So notice already, Abby, that you're using the phrase, the FDA pumps drugs into animals. You're giving away that you're hostile to them. If I were to agree with the FDA that treating animals with drugs to prevent herd illness is viable, that's a fair way to think about it. So you really, even your language already says to me that you are not open-minded about this. I mean, be realistic. There's really good reasons why you want farmed animals to be pumped full of drugs. There are. Admitting that doesn't make you weak. It makes you a human being who understands that you're not right about this. You just have a certain set of beliefs that you think are right, and you're trying to argue in favor of them. But there are also good reasons to pump farmed animals full of chemicals. You can't just deny that there's logic there. If there weren't logic there, nobody would be doing it. So same thing. If Trump weren't appealing as a president, if Biden weren't appealing as a candidate, people would not be supporting them. So you can't just be like, this is crap. How can anybody believe this shit? People who believe this are idiots. That doesn't get you anywhere. If I were to support not vaccinating children, I would say that the increase in vaccine is also correlated with a rise in food allergies. Good. And Sarah, you can tap into that fear. Parents are afraid. They're afraid and they don't understand a lot of the medical, and medicine's not guiltless. They've done a lot of shitty stuff. So you have to really come from a place of understanding why they are nervous about vaccines, because that's the only way they're going to hear you. Why not, though? Why not try to convince the hardest supporters of certain topics that they could be wrong, or if not, push them towards the fence? Tom, because you're not skilled enough to do that. When you can show me that you can argue with an open-minded supporter or an open-minded antagonist, then you can take on the hard stuff. But from what I'm seeing across the board, you are already, like, look even at Abby, the way Abby could not take that sentence and go convince even an undecided person about the FDA because she reeks of bias. And I'm not saying don't be biased. I'm saying be biased in the right ways, because you can't eliminate bias. It's a persuasive speech. But when I see that you're amazing at convincing people who are sort of on the fence, then you can go after the hard people. But I'm telling you, most of us don't have that skill set. You have to practice. And the way you practice is by starting with people who are in your circle of influence and then moving out to people who are outside your circle of influence. But most of you can't even convince the people in your circle of influence yet. Right, Holly, right. Euthanasia is sort of like if you're really, really trying to fight it. Physician-assisted suicide is sort of like the default term, but there's even better terms, I think, that are more on your side of the fence. Leah, if I were against prison minimum wage, I would bring up the funds could be used to make prisons safer. So in other words, we're taking money away from increasing safety. Like for example, we're not paying guards so that we can give workers increase minimum wage. I think that's fair. I think that's a really good point if that's really what they're saying. And I think you have a response to that, which is, but doesn't giving them a standard of living also help with safety? And again, just like I was telling about Sarah about the parents and vaccination, you got to be really understanding here because people are very scared. They're scared of prison violence. People who work in prisons are terrified that something's going to go wrong. You can't just deny that fear. But I think what you're saying here seems very reasonable. It seems like you're really trying to take them into account, and that's what we want. Thank you, Becca. Tom, I'm not trying to be brutal. I go up against people in debates all the time that are hardcore against me, and I do not sway them. I'm just saying I learned how to be more, at least though, here's what I want. I don't necessarily think that we go into debates and argument with people who really don't believe us to win. I think we go in so somebody leaves that debate and goes, that liberal has a lot of good points. The same way that I might leave that debate saying, that conservative has a lot of good points. Also, okay, last thing I want to tell you about is the election of 1800. I think this is very important. A lot of people don't know this piece of history, and I think it really helps frame the disagreement piece. Then I will download this, come back for questions about your individual speeches. Prior to the election of 1800, which was, I think it was Jefferson and Adams, the rules of the Constitution, at this point the Constitution was 20, 30 years old, were that the two candidates who ran for president, whoever lost the election became vice president of the other candidate. Genius system. Very much focused on productive disagreement. I run as a, whatever they were, Federalist back then. You run as a states' rights person. I think they were the original Republicans. I will say my history of civics is not great. And if I win, you're my VP, and if you win, I'm your VP. Which is an amazing, Jefferson v. Adams, which is an amazing system because it means that not only throughout the whole entire debate and primaries and election do we have to think about the fact that no matter how this shapes out, we still have to work together. It also means that for the next 4 years, you're going to have two people who are on the exact opposite side of issues having to find a way to work together. Makes so much sense to me. So then the election of 1800 happens, and it's so awful, and they rip each other a new asshole on a regular basis, and they're taking out ads in the paper about how so-and-so's mother was a whore, and it's really bad. When people tell me about how bad politics have gotten, I always say you need to look at the election of 1800. And then, as a result, when Adams won, I think Adams beat Jefferson in that election, he says, no way is this person going to be my president. So they actually have to revise the Constitution, which is some amendment, that's like the 27th Amendment or something. They actually have to revise the Constitution because these two grown men decided they refused to work together. They were just too ideologically opposed. So as a result of these two people deciding that they just couldn't handle it, and of course also being the people who wrote the Constitution and therefore being able to revise it on a dime, we now have a system in place, the two-party system, which is terrible. Because, again, nobody is forced to work together because we can just elect a conservative or a liberal into office and that person can sign all the executive orders and shoehorn people into doing stuff they want or create gridlock and get nothing done. And then we can just swing the pendulum the other way and then back the other way. And essentially, we solve nothing. We just have different periods of one person being right and another person being right. That is the cost of unproductive disagreement, is a system that for hundreds of years has very seldom solved as many problems as it has caused. Now, sometimes you do get bipartisan legislation, and it works, and that's great. But a lot of the reason we don't is because we have a political system where people are more interested in being right than they are in productive disagreement. So when I say that this stuff is important, I'm not just saying that abstractly. I'm also agreeing that it is seldomly practiced. So I have a lot of sympathy for you that what I'm teaching you is not what you see in the media. It's not how most people approach argument and debate, but it is something that your life will be better if you unlearn what you've learned and start learning new strategies. Again, not all the time. Sometimes soapboxing is correct. Sometimes being in a polemic is right. Sometimes bitching and moaning about how right you are feels good. But it depends on the goal. If the goal is to solve a problem, to work with someone else, to be productive, to find better solutions, you're going to have to find a different way of thinking. I don't see any more volunteers for ideas. I'm going to download the video. I'll be back in 1 minute and we can do Q&A. Thanks for listening.